All right, we're back for Wednesday night worship. We took a break last week for Vacation Bible School for the students. And if you missed that, you can still go online and catch up and watch those videos. We had a good time just doing some fun stuff, doing some good Bible study, and talking about building foundations based on who Jesus is. And so if you participated in that, we appreciate it. Hope you had fun, made some cool crafts, ate some good snacks, got some good Bible study in. But this week we get to start back with our Bible studies, our Wednesday night Bible studies. Hopefully, got to enjoy some worship time with our worship band and did some good songs today. And just being able to focus on who Jesus is and worship Him for who He is. And so today we're going to be in Joshua chapter 7, which is an Old Testament book. We're going to look at this one specific story, just kind of talk about really the way sin affects our lives and affects our hearts, and really God's position on sin and what sin looks like. And so we're going to be looking at one big example of sin and just how it works through not just one person's life, but really affects everyone. And so, if you know anything about Joshua, Joshua followed Moses. So, Moses was born in Egypt under these awesome, uh, big circumstances when he was a Hebrew. The ones in Egypt, the Pharaoh was having all the Hebrew babies murdered because they wanted to limit the number of Hebrews in Egypt because they were taking over and they had made them slaves, and so they wanted to end all of their lives. And so Moses was actually protected. His mother put him in a basket, sent him down the river. The Pharaoh's daughter found him, raised him in the palace, and then God used that special circumstance to really use Moses to deliver his Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt. It was a promise that God had made, and God followed through with it. And so He used Moses to bring them out of Egypt. You know the story of the 10 plagues. You know how they crossed the Red Sea. They spent 40 years in the desert because they grumbled against God. And so they spent 40 years in the desert just so God could kind of teach them to trust Him, and that generation that wouldn't trust God would kind of fade off, and the new generation that saw God do amazing things, they were going to trust God and do things to follow Him. And so, as Moses died while they were entering into the promised land, Joshua takes over as the leader of these Hebrews, and he actually is the one that takes them into the promised land, and they're going to start trying to make this land their own. And so Joshua was the one in charge of that. One thing about Joshua was that when Moses sent 12 spies into the promised land to see if that's good for them to take, um, Joshua and Caleb were the only two of 12 who trusted God enough that He was going to help them take this land. Because when they went into the land, they saw giants, they saw fertile land, they saw everything that God had promised, but then they saw giants that gave them fear, and so they were more fearful of the giants than of God, who have been doing these miraculous things. And so Joshua and Caleb were the only ones that said, "Let's trust God and let's go with it." All the rest of them feared, and so that's why they spent 40 years in the desert waiting for God to make all this happen. And so Joshua becomes a leader. He takes them into the promised land, and they begin fighting against those who live in this land so that they can claim it for their own. And God is making all this happen. So they've been trusting God, following God, listening to God, and they've gotten all the way to this point where we see they enter into the city of Jericho. Now, if you watch VeggieTales or you've been a part of children's church anyway, you know the story of Jericho, where they marched around the city 7 times, they blew trumpets, they yelled and screamed, and God brought the walls of Jericho down. Jericho was this big fortified city, and they were able to overcome the city of Jericho just by simply trusting in God and really not trying to battle against Jericho, but just do the weird thing that he said, which was to march around the city. They went all the way to the point where they trusted God 7 days in a row, marching around the city, playing music, screaming and yelling at the wall, and then on the seventh day it fell down, just as God had promised it would. It would. And so God made them agree. He made them agree that they were going to destroy everything in Jericho because it stood against them as an enemy of God. They were going to destroy everything in Jericho except for one person, who was the one person who helped the spies when they came and saw Jericho. Her name was Rahab, and so she's mentioned in the Bible as someone who had great faith in God. And so the one person that was saved in Jericho was Rahab. And so God made them agree to destroy everything that had to do with Jericho and just move on. And so the next thing that they did after that, it was they went to this other town, smaller city, smaller place. It was called Ai, which is spelled A-I. And so you see them coming to this town, and instead of wanting to send all of their troops, they kind of talk it over, mill it over, and decide that what they're going to do is they're just going to send like 3,000 and go take care of this town, Ai, and then come on back and regroup with the rest of the Hebrews, the rest of the Israelites, and keep going in their plan. But there's one problem. There's one problem. One small sin that took place between Jericho and the city of Ai. So we're in Joshua. We're in Joshua chapter 7, and we're going to read about this great sin that took place. There's a man named Achan, Achan. And Achan is known as the troubler of Israel. And so as we read about Achan, just know that he's the one who messed up. He's the one who brought judgment on the Hebrews. So verse 1 in chapter 7, it says this: But the people of Israel broke faith in regard to the devoted things, for Achan, the son of Carmi, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things, and the anger of the Lord burned against the people of Israel. So Achan, who was a part of the Hebrews, who was part of Israel, he decided that instead of destroying everything about Jericho, he was going to keep some of the devoted things, which would be things that they worship, things that they use for their own worship of their own false gods. And so he kept those things. Why would he keep those things? Maybe as souvenirs. Maybe he wanted to sell them. Maybe he thought that he needed those things, that he wasn't willing to give up the gods of another place. We don't really know exactly why he wanted to keep those things, other than they had some value to him, that he wanted them more than he wanted to trust God and listen to God's decree. And so that's what Achan did. He kept the devoted things, but he kept them in secret. He didn't want anyone to know. And so when it comes to sin in our own lives, a lot of times that's how it works, right? Sometimes we'll have a sin that creeps in. We'll have something that is more important to us than actually following God's law or following God's decree or what God says is best for us. That's where we start to see sin creep into our own lives, that we choose for ourselves something that's more valuable than just simply trusting God. And a lot of times that thing ends up being secret, right? But it doesn't say secret for long, does it? It doesn't say stay secret for a very long time, because people eventually find out. And the truth is, God knows, even though it may be secret to anyone else in the world, God knows those secret sins. He knows those things that creep into our lives and pull us away from Him, the things that we choose over God. He knows about those things. They're not secret to Him. And a lot of times, that's that's a hint for us to know that we need to be safeguarding ourselves against those sins. That we need to be pushing those sins away when we feel our heart start to sink when we think about how we've chosen other things before listening to God. That's what we call conviction. It's this secret sin that he's trying to hide and keep away from everyone, but eventually it will come out. So I want to encourage you, think about what kind of sin you may have in your life. Each one of us has sin, right? There's great things that go on in our lives, great things that we like to celebrate, and trophies we like to put up in our lives, right? And great pictures that we like to put on the fridge. There's great things in our lives that we like to promote, but it's the sin in our lives that we try to hide away and we try to keep secret. We try to tuck away under the bed or in the closet or under the mattress or wherever. We try to hide these sins in our lives that we don't want other people to know about and to see and to know that we are connected with those things. So, what kind of sin do you have in your life that's pulling you away from God and you know it's there? You know it's following you around. We all have those things. So take a few minutes to think about that. We're going to come back and we're going to see what happens in the nation of Israel because of Achan's sin.